Mr Speaker, I want to thank the Minister for his introductory speech. To say to him that I thought it sounded a bit like it had been drafted in another office. It didn't really sound like him, and it sounded like his heart was maybe not quite in it in the way that it might otherwise be. Mr Speaker, I want to make it clear from the beginning that the Labour opposition will support this bill going to a select committee. I think it is important that select committee has hearings, especially has hearings in Auckland, to work through the issues in the bill. But I do want to make it clear to the Minister that it may well be that the Labour Party does not support it further unless some of our concerns around the bill are sorted out. And I say to the Minister, the primary concern that the Labour Party has with this legislation is the power that is left in the hands of a minister for liquor licensing and town planning type issues, resource consent issues, in a way which, in my opinion, is inconsistent. I do want to thank Mr McCulley and his office for the consultation that's occurred to date, and I think this bill is better than it was when we first saw drafts of it. But the concern that I do have is that even with the guiding hand of the Minister of Economic Development, I'm not sure that any minister should be making decisions about roads being opening or closed, buildings being developed, bars being opened or closed, licences being taken away or granted. My view is that our system works better when we have people who have proper judicial or senior legal background who can make those decisions rather than them being decisions which are in the end political decisions, because the way the legislation is drafted at the moment, although a minister must receive the recommendation from the authority, he is not obliged to take it, and I think that is an issue that has to be worked through. Now, as to the necessity for having something, I think there are two areas which convince me that it is necessary. One is that in the end we don't know what we don't know. There could well be something which becomes apparent quite late in the process, where we will need to have changes made which would go across normal resource consent procedures, and especially the time frames involved in those. And there is a degree of unpredictability about what that might be, and some of it might happen right up till even during the Rugby World Cup itself. If, for example, there is a transport planning problem that becomes apparent in Auckland, and particular streets need to be changed. Now, if it was in Wellington, there wouldn't be a problem. The local authority has systems and it can do it relatively quickly, but then we then get on to what the other problem is, and the problem is Auckland. Auckland, at the best of times, is not good at handling major events. Its regulatory processes are not good. Its ability to do things... it's not the fault of the local members or the soon-to-be local members for Auckland. In fact, I'm sure if we had the election early and Jacinda was the local member, as she will be after the next election, then this bill would be unnecessary, because she within a couple of weeks would have sorted the council out. But the point that I'm trying to make, Mr Speaker, in a serious vein, is that Auckland has generally not been as good at accommodating events as Wellington and Christchurch and to a lesser extent Dunedin, because they don't have things quite of the same scale, have been. And then on top of that, we have the super city and its development, and the fact that it will be about a year old and still developing its systems at the point of the Rugby World Cup, and many of these decisions need to be made well before that. So I don't have a problem with the development of an authority. I don't have a problem with the time frames being more limited than they would otherwise be, although I will say to people, don't rely on this system. If you can get your approval under a standard system now, you'd be better to do it on that basis and have something which is enduring rather than just for the Rugby World Cup. And also, I think people shouldn't get the expectation that approvals will be anything like automatic under this legislation, because this legislation does not change the basis for making the decisions. The things that have to be weighed up, the rules are not essentially changed as far as the substantive balance required for making the decisions. There will, I think, be some more consistency, and that will be good, but people should not rely on this. But, Mr Speaker, one of the concerns I've got about the bill, and the reason I'm supporting a relatively limited select committee period, is the fact that it has taken so long to get in. It was my expectation that this legislation would be introduced in the first half of 2009, and we're now about a year later than we thought it should be. I'm not particularly criticising, in fact probably my own intervention held it up by a month or so in order to attempt to get it improved. But Mr Speaker, it would have been better if this had been in place at some time in the past and things could have been moved along. The other point that I would make is that I'm not in a position where I have any great concerns around the running of the tournament itself. I'm sure that the games and the arrangements will work well. I'm pretty pleased with the development of the stadia. I took the opportunity to have a quick glance at the Forsyth Bar Stadium in Dunedin when I was down there for the weekend. It was opposite the nude rugby. I say it slight by the way, Mr Speaker, I was a touch judge on the adjoining ground to the game where the nude rugby game was being played, and I spent quite a lot of time avoiding being photographed looking in that particular direction. Sorry? No, I wasn't wearing dark glasses, but I was deliberately keeping my back as far as possible to that game. The point that I'm making is the Forsyth Bar Stadium looks like it's making good progress. Certainly Eden Park is making good progress as well, and there's been a number of areas, including, I understand, in the Hawke's Bay, where things are actually completed to the point that they need to be, and that is good. But there are some minor things around Eden Park, more around the transport arrangements, and I'm sure that a lot of people will be supportive of making sure that the public transport arrangements, which my understanding is the last bit of those, will have to be put in place as a result and through this legislation, and I think that is something which will be useful. Another point that I will make is that I am getting a bit concerned at the leverage activity. I mean, I'll just say as an aside, how come, as we have got all that great publicity coming back from South Africa, there are no Tourism New Zealand stands? They're meant to be supporting. We've put money into them for media purposes, and basic things like having New Zealand trade and tourism backgrounds when our all whites are being interviewed is not being done. It is just basic stuff that the government has got people over there to do, and they're not doing it. So I just want to say that I haven't got enormous faith in some of the arrangements that are going on here. The government's got to stop the arguments between McCulley and Brownlee and just get on with the work.